and the rest of today is all me. So today we're going to talk about the attack lifecycle, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. It's a really awesome model to kind of talk about, and we'll talk about why, and you guys will all see that. So disclaimer, we're going to kind of give you a demo, which is you guys are going to be attacking machines. This stuff can be used in the real world to attack other machines. Don't do it against machines you don't own or don't have explicit written permission to do so. I am giving you warning now. If you do it against the company, you will get caught and you will go to jail. I'll come visit you, but that's about it. I won't bail you out and I won't be your lawyer, so don't do it. So for my lectures and kind of the things that I do, I try to make it a fun environment. This is not a classroom, so please do not raise your hand. Just shout out. I can't see the entire room, so just shout out if you want to say something or have a question. Heckle me if you feel like it. Have fun, ask questions. This whole thing will be interactive, so you guys are going to need to give input and stuff like that. So it'll be a fun time, so just shout out, have some fun. So I have what I call this open door policy, so never, ever, 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 never, ever, 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 ever leave this room with a question. So if you have a question about something I've gone over, don't leave this room with it, okay? Come up and ask me, we'll talk it through or whatever. Maybe I just got to go over a couple things with you. That's perfectly fine. Got a question, come ask me. Don't leave this room with a question. So security, it's not a problem one person can solve or one group can solve. We must come together as a community to kind of solve this huge problem. So kind of keep that in mind moving forward. So why the attack lifecycle? To understand our attackers' motivations, right? Their motives, the things that they do, why do they do them? Understand their actions. Why are they doing certain things? Why are they using these tools over these tools? What are they trying to accomplish? And the attack lifecycle is really important for anyone who wants to do red teaming or blue teaming at any time in the future. So I promise you, give me 20 minutes of your undivided attention. Actually close your laptop lid. If you've actually never seen me do this presentation before, I promise it'll actually be worth your 20 minutes. A lot of people who go to do interviews actually have me go over this with them before their interviews, and they feel much better. So I promise this will be very helpful for you. You will see security in a whole new light after this. So here's kind of our general flow of the attack lifecycle, right? Here's all the steps, here's the general outlook, and we're going to go through each stage, explain each one. We're actually going to go through a real attack scenario today to kind of give you guys a real world example of all this. So without further ado, I love doing the whiteboard for this, so this will be a lot of fun. I'm short. Don't make fun of me. I think I'll manage. Okay, so to kind of give you a high overview of, we're going to walk through every phase of this and everything like that. So first we have initial recon. Initial recon is where we kind of go and get as much information about the target that we're about to attack, right? So we're going to try and find as much public information as we can about them. The more information that we find here, the easier our attack is going to be later on, right? You know, if I got to develop an exploit and everything like that, it's going to take me potentially a long amount of time to actually do that when maybe they just have default creds on a service open on the public internet, right? Be a lot easier to do that second method versus the first method, right? So doing this internal recon can really make a big difference about how you do initial compromise, right? Your initial compromise is, okay, now I've actually got some type of shell inside the company, right? I have some type of control of a computer in the actual network, right? So once I've got this initial compromise, I have control of some type of computer, I'm going to do what's called establishing a foothold. Establishing a foothold is what we call persistence. If you don't know what persistence is, it's basically a type of mechanism on a box that allows us to keep access to that box, right? So we might put a scheduled task in there, right? or we might add a user or things like that. We're going to talk more about this as we go through it. I'm just trying to give you guys a high-level overview. Usually when you compromise the box, you're going to get a user normal context, right? You want to escalate privileges on that box so that you can do more with the box that you currently have under your control. You're going to do internal recon on the network, try and figure out what you can reach out and touch, pretty much try and figure out what network you're on, what resources are there. Then you're going to move laterally. You want to try and get as many other computers in the environment as you can. After you move laterally to all those computers, you're going to, again, place more persistence. And then you're going to complete your mission, right? So if you're stealing credit cards, this is where you would dump the credit card database and pretty much send them outbound to a computer that you control. So that's a very high-level overview. We're going to walk through it. If you're a little confused, don't worry. In the next 20 minutes, you won't be. So today, hypothetically, you were all hackers. We were all going to hypothetically attack PayPal.com and steal PayPal's credit card database, right? You were all going to be part of being hackers and stealing the credit card database from PayPal. So we're going to walk through that attack scenario. So initial compromise, right? We want to figure out as much information about PayPal.com. Who is our target? How may we do that? You guys can be as silent for as long as you want. I know all this information, and I'll wait for you. So how may you figure out information about PayPal.com? I'll say the first one, Google. That's the easy one. Who.is. Who is? What else? Shout them out. There's a whole laundry list of them. Social media. Expand. LinkedIn. What else? LinkedIn is the only social media that you guys use? What are you, lame? You use LinkedIn for your social media? You've already said too many. Someone else. Twitter. MySpace. Trying to get another one. He says MySpace. Facebook. Right? Other things like that, right? Has anyone ever heard of Google dorking? Okay. Can someone explain to the rest of the group what Google dorking is? Okay. So Google dorking is saying PayPal space file type space PDF, right? And basically Google will take all the documents that it knows about PayPal and all the PDFs that are associated with PayPal, right? So you can grab all these PDFs that PayPal has released, and that's really great information for you, right? So you can extract metadata from these PDFs, and a couple of things that you can get is, okay, one, you know the applications that they're using in their environment. From there, you might be able to get application versions, right? And you might be able to tell, are those applications vulnerable? Is there a known exploit or vulnerability for that application, right? That's really important, right? We haven't even moved off of step one, and we may be knowing vulnerabilities inside someone's environment just because of a PDF, right? Things like that. Usually you can find out where the file is actually being stored, and usually you can look at the file path and get someone's username, right? And that username is really important because it shows you the username schema for that environment, right? These are really big things to kind of pick up on. Other ways of kind of figuring out information about PayPal. There's one really big one that you guys missed altogether. How about their website? Too easy, he says, right? You want a challenge, he says, right? But going to their website might be a good start, right? So if you go to PayPal's website, what might you find? PayPal.com, he says. Email addresses. So let's talk about emails. So usually we have the username, the @ symbol, and then the domain, right? This username is really important because now you have a list of usernames that you can use later on in your attack, right? Again, we haven't even left step one, and we're figuring out lots of information about our target, right? These are really important things, yes. Web server versions are really great. I'll give you guys a story. I forget who the company was, but this company, basically a bunch of attackers saying, hey, we're service X. You've signed up to use our service. Here's an invoice for $20,000. And the company went, okay, this looks legit, and put them straight onto the payroll for the next 4 years. All they had to do was send an email saying, hey, we're X service, you need to pay us $20,000 to someone, probably that was on their website, who had the ability to access financial data and to make purchasing power. Think about that. These people made millions of dollars just because they sent a simple email and just said, hey, give me money, and people went, okay. Think about that. It's really... Yeah. You guys sit here and laugh, but this happens every day, and this is part of your guys' job, right? And we haven't even left step 1. All right. So we're going to move on to step 2, which is initial compromise, right? So basically, we're going to take the approach where we're going to send them a phishing email, right? We're going to send them a malicious document. That's how we're going to kind of go through this. Probably one of the best ways to do about doing this, right? So I'm going to take that one off the board and go social engineering. But there's also other ways to attack a company. How else might you attack a company? And the room is silent. Can't wait to give you all jobs.
Well, it's similar to social engineering, but facility pen testing. So,
Sure. Yeah. So if I can get physical access to your place of business and stick a USB drive into a computer, sure, why not? Right? Someone leaves a computer open, sure, why not? How about, yeah? Yep. Exploitation, I'm just going to keep it simple, but yes. Exploitation and vulns, it's not that common, but it does still happen, right? Equifax, what was it? I think it was Equifax. They had default creds on a service. Default creds on a service. Default creds. This still happens in what, 2018? What was it, 2017? Right? Things like this still happen. All right, establishing a foothold, right? Once we've gotten some type of access to a box, what might we want to do to kind of establish a foothold, which is usually called persistence. Persistence is just a fancy term for keeping access to a box. So again, one type of persistence is like scheduled tasks, right? So we might put a scheduled task on a box that calls back to a box that I control every day at 9 a.m. So if the security, the security team catches my initial compromise, right, but they don't find my persistent mechanism, I just got to wait until 9 a.m. the next day for a new shell to come back, right? Things like that are really effective. So what other type of mechanisms might I use? Sure. Modify a service. That one's really hard, but really good. What else? Put your hand down. You said too much. And the whole room is silent. The whole room is silent. How else might you keep access to a box? Nothing? How about user accounts? And the list goes on, right? There's multiple different ways, user accounts, all these different type of things. Then we got escalating privileges. So let's say you've popped Sally in HR. Usually she's going to have a normal user context, which means she has low privileges on her box. Hopefully, fingers crossed, right? Hopefully, she doesn't have administrative privileges on her box. So we're going to continue with that scenario, right? So usually you're going to use some type of operating system vulnerability or exploit to kind of escalate your privileges on that box, right? You may also use social engineering techniques to kind of escalate privileges. I know a pen testing company, they do this tactic where if they can't escalate privileges on a box, what they do is that they make the box incredibly impossible for the user to use. They just make it so frustrating that the user picks up the phone and calls IT. Then IT comes down and they log in with their administrative credentials on the box. And guess what they just got? Administrative credentials to the entire network, right? Think about that. These are some ways that you can kind of get around these things, right? And that's kind of a social engineering type attack. All right, internal recon, right? So we want to kind of see what else is on the network, right? What else can we reach out? How can we learn about where the credit card databases are? How can we learn out what we can touch, right? So one type of example is kind of like a ping scan. What other type of things might you do to kind of figure out what other computers are on the network, resources, or anything like that? I know you all know this because you've all taken CSEC 101. So there should be way more hands up, and I'll wait for responses. Put your hand down. You've already said too many. You too. It's here for some new people.
Look at their Active Directory and try to find more users, that type of stuff.
Yeah, you can do LDAP queries against Active Directory. I've actually never heard that one before. I like that one. And playing off of that one that's kind of really cool is what used to kind of work is Active Directory keeps a list of host names for an entire environment, and you used to be able to ask Active Directory, give me a list of host names for all the boxes currently active in the environment, and basically give you a list of host names and IP addresses. So now you've got an exact list of boxes that you can attack everywhere in the environment. So things like that, keep that in mind. So what other ways might you find out about other boxes in the environment? Nmap. I like it. What might you specifically scan for? Great, right? So you may kind of look for common ports that are open, right? So a common port for Linux is port 22, which is associated with SSH. For Windows, there's usually 137, 138, 139, and 445 for NetBIOS and SMB. Those are really common ports for Windows, right? So these are kind of different ways to kind of fingerprint whether it's a Linux machine versus a Windows box. You may also want to do like things scanning for port 80 and 443, which is looking for web services, right? So what type of interesting web services may be running on a network? What? What type of websites? Yeah. Router configuration pages. Never heard that one. I like that one. That's actually pretty good. So like router pages, right? What if I had the ability to kind of get access to this and figure out all the networks and how different networks are like kind of mapped out together and what the firewall rules are between each network, right? Things like that are really important, right? Another really important thing to kind of look for is maybe their internal wiki, right? This is kind of like a generic term, but an internal wiki usually has all their documentation for their network. What if you could get access to that treasure trove? Think about that. All their documentation about how they set up all their computers and how their entire network is, right? Some things you could extract from there. Where are the credit card databases that you want to attack, right? That'd be kind of great to know because you still have no idea where they may or may not be, right, at this point. Who is the database administrator for those boxes, right? Because you need some type of way to access those boxes, some type of credentials to access that box, right? So who administrates those boxes, right? So these are important things to know. These are important things that you might be able to extract from that documentation, right? A lot of people still have open shares a lot, right? So open shares so that people can just have an open share to drop files onto and share with employees, right? Sometimes they will have authentication, sometimes they won't, right? And if they don't, you can just go in there and just grab all this sensitive information and documents and things like that. And again, you'd be really surprised what people will just put into an open share. Social security numbers and things of that nature, right? They all end up there, and you smile and you laugh, but it does happen. So these are different things that you want to do during internal recon. You want to figure out what's there. All right, lateral movement. Again, this is kind of where you want to reach out to other boxes and log into them, right? So I'll kind of give you some. So for Linux, this basic one is going to be SSH, or what we call web shells. So web shells is kind of something you put on a web server and allows you to have access to that web server, kind of allow run commands or run through the file directory and things of that nature. You can look up a very common one called C99. So for Windows, you can do like WinRM, which is like SSH but for Windows. PSExec, and SMB. Has anyone ever heard of pass the hash with Windows? All right. Does anyone know why pass the hash is so effective on a Windows environment?
Because if you have initial credentials, you can continue to pass them on. Most networks use the same initial credentials.
Yep. So basically, if I'm on a box, say Sally's box here, when I escalate privileges, right, I'm able to dump the hash of her password from memory, and then that's all I need to move around the network, is just her hash, right? So pass the hash is incredibly effective on a Windows domain, right? I don't need to know your actual password. I just need to know the hash of your password, and then I can just move around the network. It's incredibly effective, and it still works today. So keep that in mind. These are things that are really important, and they feed in. So again, we could use pass the hash, and we can log into 30 other boxes, and now we can place more persistence there on these boxes. Now we have 30 boxes in an environment that we control. So if we lose our initial box, right, we still have 30 other boxes in the environment that we control, right? This is really important. This is really how attackers really dig themselves into a network and stay there for years. All right. So maintain persistence. Again, this is where they put more persistence on the box. So if they're really dedicated, they might do something like a driver or services. Basically, maintaining persistence and establishing a foothold are pretty much the same thing. Again, just placing persistence. Depending on the attacker, they may use the exact same techniques again, or they may use different techniques. It kind of just depends on the attacker. So I'll give you another kind of story that's really cool. So there was a guy on an incident response, and basically they had kind of caught 4 different connections outbound that they knew were attributed to the attacker, but they weren't sure where in the network the attacker was, what type of boxes had he compromised. So what they did is they cut 3 out of the 4, and I'll repeat myself again, 3 out of the 4. So they left 1 active connection open for the attacker, and the attacker went, oh no, and fired off all his maintaining persistence in the network, and the whole entire network lit up like a firework. And they watched all these boxes become active and start calling back, and they watched all that, they killed all the connections, and they did a cleanup. So things like this can be really effective, things of different ways to kind of think about this. All right, then we do complete the mission, right? So we finally found, I don't know, Bob on the database team, right? We finally found a way to his box, and we finally found a way to grab his credentials with a keylogger, right? We finally found a way to move ourselves all the way to the credit card database. Now it's our time to dump the credit card database, right, and kind of exfiltrate that data outside of the network, right? Get it outside of the network. We want those credit cards, right? They don't do us much good when they're on the inside, right? So what are some different ways you might move data out of the network? ICMP. Which is the ping protocol, for those who don't know. Or ping is part of ICMP. DNS, if you want to be really covert. Also, DNS has an incredibly small payload, so it'll take an extremely long time. SFTP, we'll just leave that at FTP, but yes. DNS payload will take an extremely long time, so we'll leave it at that. Any other things you might use? You could push it out to Dropbox or Google Drive, right? Think about that. So things like that. So I love this little tidbit. Why is it better to use RAR versus zip when you want to exfiltrate data as a red teamer? Anyone have an idea? Probably.
Is the RAR header like not at the start of the file or something?
Very good. Yeah. So with RAR is that the data that not decrypts, but uncompresses the data is at the beginning. With zip, it's at the end. So if I detect you halfway through as a defender, I can cut that connection and you've lost all that data, right? But with RAR, it's at the beginning. and if I catch you halfway through, you still get half of that data, right? That's really important. So kind of just like little things to kind of keep in mind. All right, so we kind of have a general attack here, right? Attack scenario, right? So now let's kind of go through as defenders, as blue teamers, and see how we might put in security controls to detect it or prevent it, right? In most cases, we can't prevent something from happening, but we can detect it, right? Prevention is usually a really hard thing to sell in an environment because prevention stops things from happening. And if you don't set up prevention correctly, your company loses money. And think about that, right? But detection is usually an easier thing. All you say is, hey, your production environment, I just want to collect logs, right? I'm not trying to stop you from doing anything. I just want to collect logs and monitor what's happening, right? It's a much easier conversation to have. That's probably true. All right. Come on. Okay, great. Okay, so how may you detect or prevent someone doing initial recon on your company? You don't have to say a specific security control. Just think about the actual action that's happening. What might we want to detect about that action, right? So we got Google, Whois, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, things being posted on your website such as email and things like that. How may we detect or prevent that? Don't put it there, he says. What specifically don't we want to put there? I like it. However, is that ever going to happen? No, that's a really hard policy to say. We, the security team, are going to take authority. You can't make anything public, right? Not going to fly, right? They're just going to rehire a new security team, right? But you may put a policy in place that says, hey, before we ship out these documents, we want to scrub that metadata, right? We want to take that metadata, clean it, remove it. You can actually go through that process and remove it. What else? How about the emails? What about them? What might we do about the emails that are public? We need to have emails public because we need people to be able to contact us. What may we do about them? Yeah. Yep. What we call them is aliases, right? Have an alias email, something that's just generic. It's not very specific to a user. Things like that may be really helpful, right? For like Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, you may have a policy in place if your company can actually control that about saying, hey, don't post certain things online. But that's a really hard thing to kind of enforce. Whois, you can get Whois guard, things like that. Also, things that might happen at the initial recon phase is like things like Nmap, right? So Nmap is kind of something you might be able to detect, but there's scanners all over the internet constantly scanning everything. So if you try and detect that, you're going to be spending a lot of time chasing down false positives. So it's not really a thing you're going to kind of do, but it's kind of something you just kind of know about. All right, initial compromise, right? So if we take social engineering, right, which is sending a malicious document, how may we detect or prevent malicious documents coming through? So usually malicious documents are going to leverage some type of vulnerability or exploit in a known vulnerability or exploit in a vulnerable web, or sorry, in an application. So what might we do to stop that?
Stay up to date.
Stay up to date, right? It's really that simple. Just update, right? updates, right? Anything else? You guys are so boring. None of you are talking. This is the one thing you should learn like 30 times in your CSEC career, not NMAP. Promise you that. I will tell you that like I used this model 2 weeks ago. I had 6 interviews. I used it in 2 interviews of those 6 interviews. So I talked about this for 2 whole hours out of 6 hours. This is one of the best things. So updates are the only way we can kind of stop initial compromise from happening. That's it? Are updates going to help you with default credentials? No. Change your credentials? No. Right? So change your credentials, right? But change creds is very easily said than done. So you can do things like vuln scanners, which are actually have the ability to actually like detect what the application is and try default creds for that application, right? So that's kind of one way to go about this. It's kind of like a vuln scanner. All right. You can also do education when it comes to social engineering. When you're sending malicious documents, is to not have your users open it all together would probably be the best bet, right? So education, right? I actually work at a company where we actually have a very generic email that if someone doesn't feel safe about opening up a document, they send it to that email, comes straight to the security team, and we can review it for them, and we get back to them usually within an hour or so, telling them yay or nay about it. And it's a really effective program for us. So that's kind of some ways to think about that, right? Educating your users that if you don't feel safe about something, make sure to come ask us first, and we'll kind of walk through it with you, show you some different ways to kind of make sure if it's safe or not. So again, and just kind of making sure that your users are aware of different type of things like, hey, you have a domain, but 2 letters are switched in it, or have you ever received an email from this person in the past, right? All right, establishing a foothold, right? So Sally in HR, right? She is connected to a domain, right? So she has a account that she can log on to any box in the company network, right? So she has one account for herself, right? But the box that she usually uses, if she creates a user account, doesn't that look really weird? Like a local user account for Sally, that looks like really weird when you're connected to a domain, right? So things like that, looking for local accounts that shouldn't be there, that just got created, look really weird. Schedule tasks, right? Most of your environment is going to have the same schedule tasks, right? So kind of doing some type of statistics or anomaly detection of going, hey, this one box out of 30,000 machines has this one scheduled task. That's kind of really weird, right? Modifying services, if you do that, you'll send up some flags, I promise. There'll be some flares in the air when you do that. So if you have some logs monitoring that, you'll definitely be able to see that, right? So these are all kind of detection-based things. Escalating privileges, right? I guess operating, as we said already, operation OS vulns, so that's just going to be patching and updates, right? All right, internal recon. How may we detect internal recon? Doesn't it look really weird that Sally in HR is Nmapping people? No? That's kind of normal for her? Is that just... Oh, so she's got some extra tasks on her plate. I like it. She's taking initiative of herself, right? So Nmap does have some signatures that are kind of detectable if an attacker doesn't change them. So those may be some things that we kind of look for, right? It looks really weird that one box in our environment is trying to talk to 200 plus boxes all at once, right? Right? Things like that may be things you want to look for, is a box that's having a one-to-many connection in a short amount of time. LDAP queries, right? If we have 30,000 users, it's kind of weird that one box is asking for 30,000 users all at once, right? Yep. So things like that, right? All right. So lateral movement. Has anyone ever used PSExec? Scott has. You have. Okay. So I'll tell you, PSExec, right? When you run PSExec on a remote box, what happens on that remote box is a service gets created as the highest privileges for a Windows box, right? The highest privileges for a box, so system, right? Highest level privileges gets created as service, right? That creates a lot of alarm bells, right? A lot. And the service is called PSExec. So it's a very big red flag, and it's probably something you want to look for in your logs is PSExec being used in your environment. It was a really big staple within the last 10 years being used as a system administration tool, but we've kind of migrated away from that tool. So it's really not being used all that much. People are starting to move towards WinRM or things like Puppet and Chef to kind of remotely manage these boxes, at least for Windows. So if you use PSExec, maybe something to kind of look into. If your company actually does use PSExec for remote administration, your IT department probably has a set of boxes that they use to do that, right? So if you see a box outside of that scope using PSExec, probably something you want to look into, things like that. All right, so maintaining persistence, again, as we already talked about, putting drivers and services on a box that are new are going to create a lot of flags and things like that. You want to look for that. All right, completing the mission. Okay, so when we make a normal internet connection, right? This is you. You make a normal internet connection to the web server for some type of data, and if it needs to, the web server will reach out to the database for that data. The database will grab it, bring it back to the web server, and the web server will return the data to you. Does the database ever directly send you the client data? Does that ever happen? Hopefully not, right? I've never seen a setup where it does that, and if it does, that's really bad. So again, back to our scenario where you are dumping credit card data, right? And you're dumping it straight from the database server, right? This looks weird. This looks bad. This should never happen, right? So how do we stop these type of things from happening? How do we stop the database server from reaching out? DMZs, yeah. Firewalls, right? Put a big old wall of fire here, right? Saying, hey, we're not going to allow our database to connect outbound, right? Only connections that are initiated outbound to our web server, and then our web server is the only thing that's allowed to talk outbound, right? That's kind of one way to really mitigate this type of thing, right? Or to really control this type of thing. It's a really good preventive control to kind of put in place. Also watching your boxes and seeing how much they're exfiltrating outbound, right? Usually you'll have your database server will not be talking externally a whole lot. So if in one day it starts talking 10 gigs outbound, that may be something you want to look at, right? So network statistics will really help you here. So I know we covered a lot and I threw a lot of stuff at you guys. I know it's a lot to chew on. Does anyone have any questions about anything we just covered? Nope. All right. So I'm just going to cover this kind of just to reiterate. The attack lifecycle and a competition, like within the first 10 minutes, right? So to kind of just break it down. Initial recon, red team already knows all the details about the infrastructure before you do, so they don't have to do a recon in a competition. We already know the entire structure and setup and all the boxes and where they are, right? Initial compromise, we already have credentials, right? We already know the vulnerabilities, we already know the services, we already know all that. So we know exactly where to put the pain, we already know exactly how to log into your boxes, right? Established persistence, this is where red team puts the biggest amount of focus into is to this phase, right, to making sure that we keep and hold on to your boxes, and some of these red teamers are really good at that. So I promise you that. Privilege escalation, right? We've already been given administrative credentials, right? We don't really need to escalate privileges. There's really no point for us to do that. Internal recon, again, we already know the entire infrastructure, so there's no need for us to do that. Lateral movement, again, we're going to have access to all the boxes in the beginning, so there's really no need to do that. Maintaining persistence, again, we're going to do this throughout the competition, make sure that we're like keeping access to all those boxes. Complete the mission. This may include overwriting your bootloader with Flappy Bird if we feel inclined to, or to just challenge you overall. So just kind of some concepts before we get to the red team demo to talk about C2/red team infrastructure concepts to kind of help you guys talk about these things at a very high level. So here we have a reverse shell and a bind shell, and I'll kind of just go over very generically the difference between each one. So here on the left, we have a bind shell, right? So we have our attacker here on the left, and we have a vulnerable box here, right? So basically, we are initiating connection as an attacker to the box we want to attack, and basically, we're able to set up some type of connection where we could control that box that way, right? So that's in a bind shell. We're initiating its connection as an attacker, right? But that doesn't always work. If we have a firewall, it's going to be almost impossible to do a bind shell attack, right? So usually bind shell attacks are not the way we're going to go about it. We're going to use a reverse shell, right? Where we have some type of intervention on the vulnerable box that runs some type of code that calls back to us, the attackers, right? And this is usually the most common thing that we'll use is we'll have the box kind of call back to us as the attacker, right? And this is a reverse shell. It's the most commonly used thing. And we're actually going to do a reverse shell today in our red team demo. So just kind of some high overviews of C2 channels if you want to look at this later. In an actual environment, like during an actual pen test, what you'll actually have is you, the vulnerable box, there's a firewall here. You'll have what we call redirectors here, and all these redirectors will call back to a team server. So again, when the redirectors get traffic coming in, they just redirect it all to the team server, right? And this is a really important concept here, right, to kind of understand during a pen test and also with actual attackers, right, is they'll have these things called redirectors, right? So let's say, for example, R1 here, right? R1 will be the box that sends phishing emails, right? So we'll send like 30 different phishing emails, right? And you detect this phishing email as it comes in, so you block R1's IP address, right? But let's say one out of those 30 people opens up that email, right? That email is actually going to call back to R2. So it's great that you blocked R1, but it doesn't do you any good, right? Because that malicious email is going to call back to a totally different box that you know nothing about, right? And then, okay, me as an attacker, I do some more work, and I place a persistent mechanism, right? And I have that persistent mechanism call back to R3. So even if you catch the R2 IP address, I still got you on the R3. Right? These are different ways that attackers kind of make you guys keep working for this, right? It makes it really hard to play this game of just blocking one IP address. We also do this at competitions all the time with you guys. Just keep it doing. So, PowerShell Empire demo. Hopefully this works and everything goes swell for you guys. Okay. So, PowerShell Empire, kind of a high overview. It's a post-exploitation agent. So actually, after you have some type of initial access to the box, you can run this thing on it. So it requires user interaction to actually compromise the box. So this demo, why is it important? You guys get to actually become the adversary, right? You get to actually become the red team person because it's fun. Also, we're going to kind of go over the scientific method here, right, a little bit. So we're going to kind of go through the red team portion, which will be fun. We're going to do that together. And then the actual challenges that you guys submit for points will be the blue team side of things. How do you detect this actual attack, right? This is kind of going through like the scientific method of going, how to create a hypothesis of going, okay, the red team initially attacked me with this. How do I detect that? And that's basically what this whole entire demo is how do we do that, right? And this is really important for competitions if you really want to do that, about how to set up some type of environment where you're running a red team activity and then detecting it, right? Understanding that every action done by the attacker makes a change. That change could be a creation, modification, a deletion. So it's basically, how do I detect that, right? How do I detect that change? Also, by the end of this demo, you'll be able to detect Empire on a box and be able to stop me at competitions. So if you do all the challenges, you'll be able to detect Empire on a box. I'm not holding anything back. You'll be able to detect me. So have fun. I use Empire all the time. So if you're going to UB, I'll be using it there, and RITSEC in the spring. So yeah, so here's what I need you guys to do. So you guys are going to need to open up VMware Workstation.
Also, these slides with all the instructions are now in demo help, as well as the little script and a couple other things.
Okay. So open up VMware Workstation. You're going to need to set the CSEC Kali 2 VM to bridge mode for the network card. This is actually kind of important, so make sure you set it to bridge mode and then start the VM. I'll bring it back up in 1 second for you guys. Once you guys actually get the box booted up and started, you guys want to open up a terminal and run the second command, which you guys are going to pull down Empire onto your boxes. And then the third command is showing you how to actually the directory that you need to go to. And then number 4, you're going to need to run a special script to get this working.
Yes, this is a bash script with a TXT extension that only has pip commands in it. I didn't want to figure out the versions for files.txt.
I mean, it makes sense. Pip is a pain.
If anyone is having any issues installing or doing anything, let me know.
I was up till 2 a.m. just trying to get this working. It just was not working.
Pit's been breaking a lot for me recently, and I don't know why.
Are you using Ubuntu? Yeah, Ubuntu pushed a patch to the kernel that breaks pip.
Oh.
Yeah, they were warned by the Python devs, hey, doing this will completely break one of the biggest utilities you use. And we'll do it anyways.
Thank bud. You haven't heard it like 3 times already? Never hurts to hear it again. Hopefully someone will teach it when I'm gone. You got it.
That's a little
when you run it from a different directory, it tries to find that script in your own directory, not where the install script is.
Ah.
It's so dumb. And then dude, I had to install all of those to fix it too. There's 6 things I had to install to fix this.
In the future, you can run those all one-line install just delaying it by spaces.
Whatever.
Sure.
So I believe
It was a lot of cool first.
Hey Scott, did we ever figure out how we're sending files around?
Xcopy works on some machines.
Oh.
If it doesn't,
You want to just create?
Gmail catches that. It doesn't let it send it. Which is weird but cool. I think the only other way is either
We could just do an open share in here.
I don't know how to set that. You know how to set that.
Sure. As people set up their boxes.
Hey Ben.
So,
I wasn't able to access the network on Bridge. Opted over to NAT to download Empire. Should I switch it back to Bridge?
if you can, hopefully Bridge will work. I was told it was working in here, and then, yeah. Okay,
It's supposed
hopefully.
to, but I'm stuck on wired.
I can tell you, Bridge works in Columbia.
All right.
Like the worst.
Where's everyone at? Did everyone run the install script? Are people still running the install script?
Remember, guys, run the install script and then run demo.txt or else it breaks.
Wait.
Yeah. No, install script first and then run it. Because that fixes it after it installs. I know.
Do not import name main.
Still installing, guys?
Here's one where it says,
Do not import name.
a team that says, allowing pasting of allowing people to pass where they have linked our security secrets. What does that even mean? Oh, come on.
So Scott, I need to add another step to this.
Oh, what's the error? What's the error? Okay, go to, Vim, what is it? User Vim. The import statement is underscore main underscore, and then
Flip them off while you do it.